Phew, the horrors of episode 3 are now behind us. It's all smooth sailing from here. More or less. But before we can embark on the beginning of Act 2 of Arcane, let me set the scene real quick, as I always do. This video is part of a series where I discuss all the cool details you might have missed in Arcane, as well as some of the impressive displays of cinematic craftsmanship on display by the wonderful people at Fortiche and Riot. I make one video for each episode, so as you've probably already guessed or already knew, there are existing videos diving into Act 1 if you're hungry for more Arcane analysis. And as always, these videos contain full-on spoilers for all of Season 1 of Arcane, not just Episode 4, so beware. I guess that's about it for disclaimers. Let's jump into our time machine as we skip forward a number of years since the last episode, traveling to our destination for this video, Episode 4 of Arcane. Happy Progress Day! Episode 4, along with Episode 9, are the two only episodes that don't start us off with a flashback. This makes a lot of sense. We all knew a time skip would be coming before this episode, and going back in time to then jump forward would be very disorienting. Instead, we start off with Heimerdinger lecturing Jayce about a guy with a very goofy sounding name, Stanwyck Pediddly. Stanwyck is a guy from the League of Legends lore who most notably took credit for some of Victor's inventions and basically made a fool of him. I won't mention any specifics because it might be a potential future spoiler, but the point is that Stanwyck was basically a fraud, at least in the League lore.
Everything he built either exploded, melted, or toppled over.
Now this obviously doesn't line up with the timeline of Arcane, since this guy's dead and all, but what I read into this is that one of Piltover's icons was a guy who took advantage of others in the name of progress, which is quite fitting for Piltover.
Your hex gates have done wonders for our city, brought scholars from distant lands, reignited...
And wallpaper. I am actually salivating. How is this so pretty? A cool little detail here, you can see the family crest of the Kiramans on this tower, showing how powerful they really are. Hextech has come a long way in however many years have passed since the last episode. It hasn't been explicitly confirmed how much time has actually passed, but based on this tweet by one of the writers of Arcane, Amanda Overton, it's been between 6 and 7 years. We'll get to what ages the characters are now, as well as some more thorough discussion about what actually happened during the time skip a bit later on. This teleportation thing, the Hex Gate, is awesome. The teleportation magic introduced in episode 2 and briefly shown in episode 3 have now been perfected and basically allows for fast travel to every corner of Runeterra. The Progress Day Fair, or exhibition, whatever you want to call it, is very clearly inspired by classic world fairs held in the late 1800s. Fortiche, being located in Paris, probably drew inspiration from the Exposition Universelle, excuse my French, held in Paris in 1889, where the Eiffel Tower was first revealed to the world. This event was also where Art Nouveau architecture slowly started evolving into Art Deco, something that is on very clear display at the Progress Day Fair. We once again see the Kiraman family crest at the top of this tent, which we later see Caitlyn standing guard at. It's a cool detail that Progress Day clearly brings a lot of people from distant regions of Runeterra to Piltover. This makes sense as the Hex Gates have made tourism to Piltover so much easier. This also mimics the classical world fairs, where people from all over the world travel to see what new wonders of technology were on display. These dudes, for example, are Vastaya. They are a humanoid animal-like race that live all over Runeterra and come in many different shapes and sizes. Here are a couple of examples of characters from League that are all Vastayan. In the League lore, the Vastayan have entire branches of subspecies with 3 main types, those that live in the sea, the land and the sky. Then we got this guy who is a Kyrian, a bat-like humanoid species native to Zorn. The name Kyrian clearly refers to the scientific name for bats, Chiroptera, so the bat ears make sense. These are their own species and are not Vastayan for some reason, though they would certainly fit the animal-like traits of a Vastaya. Echo's buddy from the Firelights called Scar, who we meet later on, is also a Kyrian.
The visionary behind the Hex Gates, a beacon of trade and prosperity for our great city of progress.
Caitlyn's parents, Tobias and Cassandra, certainly took a 180 with their attitude toward Jayce.
He's a very busy man.
In episode 2 they basically shunned him because of his illegal experiments, but now that he's rich and successful, he's their golden boy once again and they're all too happy to show him off. Goddamn two-faced rich snakes. It's now time to make our acquaintance with Caitlyn once again, who has certainly done some growing up since we last saw her. As each character is reintroduced, let's do a before and after look at each of them and dive into what most likely happened to them in the years between episode 3 and 4. Caitlyn is still trying to escape the long shadow of her family name and the clutches of her overbearing mother. She has at least managed to enroll with the Enforcers and make it through the academy, something her mother clearly doesn't approve of, as Jayce makes clear.
It's your fault, really, for not following her into a career more befitting your station.
Unfortunately for her, Cassandra is not afraid of pulling strings or talking to the new sheriff to keep Caitlyn safe and under her control.
She'd do anything to keep me from seeing the real world.
When Arcane was first released in 3 acts, one act dropping every week over the course of November 2021, small supplementary visual novels called The Council Archives were released through the League of Legends client. These were released every week alongside Arcane and tied some of the threads between Act 1 and Act 2 together. It's unclear whether these are canon or not, so take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. One of these visual novels was called The Grand Conspiracy and explored Caitlyn's investigation into the crime happening in the Undercity and the corruption in Piltover. In this, we learn that Caitlyn was working on her conspiracy theory for a long time. There are stories of Shimmer experiments being conducted on children, murders being done by people who are clearly on Shimmer, as well as a bunch of redacted documents that Marcus was probably in a hurry to hide. One of these is the report of Grayson's death, which is ruled as an animal attack by Marcus himself. There is also a picture showing part of a Shimmer-powered suit owned by Rennie, which is this lady from the 3rd act. This is most likely a prototype of the suits used by these guys in episode 8, which would make sense as Rennie's son works at the Shimmer factory, so perhaps she operates it in some capacity and maybe helped develop the Shimmer-powered suits. In addition to these files on Caitlyn's investigations, there are also visual novels for Jinx and Vi, showing some of the misery they have endured during the time skip, but we'll get to those once the sisters are reintroduced. Now back to Arcane. Caitlyn looks like herself for the most part. Her eyes are brighter blue and her chin bones are more pronounced, which interestingly makes her look a lot more like her mother. In general, Caitlyn has clearly inherited a lot of traits from both of her parents. She has her mother's eyes, nose and facial structure, and her father's hair color as well as his Asian traits. And that's not me stereotyping or anything. Caitlyn's father is from Ionia, an area of Runeterra heavily inspired by Asian culture, so it makes a lot of sense that she would have inherited that part of her father's appearance. Interestingly, Caitlyn's voice actress, Katie Leong, is Scottish but from Asian descent. Both her parents are from Hong Kong, as far as I could tell from Wikipedia. She does a British accent in Arcane of course, but it's really cool that she has some of the same mix of perceived ethnicities and nationalities as Caitlyn does in the show. I am all for voice actors and actresses actually embodying some of the same characteristics of the characters they voice. On that note, Katie Leong does a perfect job voicing Caitlyn. She nails the balance of sounding like she is upper class, but still bringing that touch of groundedness and empathy that Caitlyn is all about. Apparently she never did voice acting work before this, which is also super impressive. The Enforcer outfit she's wearing looks a little silly, but it makes sense. The group of Enforcers she's been stationed with serve mostly a ceremonial role, similar to royal guards at Buckingham Palace or the like. Either way, it's a million times better than Caitlyn's old wannabe stripper outfit in League of Legends. Yikes, those were dark times. These Enforcers aren't the tough, armor-plated, baton-wielding, mask-wearing stormtrooper lookalikes that venture into the Undercity to do the dirty work. This was probably a compromise with Caitlyn's mother. She only let Caitlyn enroll with the Enforcers if she got a job with the most safe and risk-free part of the force. This is ironic of course, considering what happens later. As for Caitlyn's age, according to this tweet from Amanda Overton, she would be between 20 and 23 years old now, with Vi being around the same age. Jayce meanwhile has been busy turning Hextech into a useful technology in order to make Piltover even richer with seemingly no benefit to the Undercity. Progress for me, but not for thee. He has clearly also moved up the ranks of the political ladder, gaining more and more influence as we will soon see. He looks more or less the same as in previous episodes, albeit with more noticeable beard stubble. Other than that, not too much has changed given the fact that he was already 24 years old in Act 1 and is now in his early 30s.
We really have to send it to Anarchy.
Have fun hurting the drunkards.
I really like Kate and Jayce's playful bantering. They have a great sibling energy going on, which is sweet.
Happy Progress Day!
This guy was also in episode 1 in this scene at the strip club. This is once again a cameo by Arnaud Deleur, co-founder and creative director of Fortiche. Someone who was also in that scene is this guy, who I think is the same as this dude on the airship. I'm almost positive this is Pascal Giraud, co-founder and director of Fortiche. To round off the trio, this guy over here is probably Jérôme Combet, the co-founder and president of Fortiche. The gang's all here. I love this transition that transports us directly from the glamorous facade of Upper Piltover and straight into its seedy underbelly, where crime happens literally right underneath the noses of all the rich people enjoying the festivities above. With the help of Marcus, Silco has greatly expanded his influence and thereby his business. It's clear from what Jayce says in episode 5
These manifests are full of discrepancies dating back months.
that Silco expanding his Shimmer business to include Piltover is not a new thing. Perhaps he's attempting to get people from Piltover addicted to Shimmer, similar to what he's been doing to his own people. A fun little Easter egg for the League of Legends fans: the dude portrayed on these barrels is Gragas, a character from the game. In the lore, he runs a brewery where he sells the best ale in all of Runeterra. Clearly his ale is a regular commodity in Piltover, since Silco's goons use his barrel as a guise for storing Shimmer. We also see Jinx's purple X again, giving us a clue that she might be on the ship. I wanna quickly go on a bit of a tangent to talk about Shimmer and what its possible origins could be. In the League universe there is something called the Void, which is a great nothingness lurking beyond the bounds of the observable world. The Void is a classic existential threat that every fantasy universe has to have. It wants to wipe out everything and everyone, sort of like the White Walkers in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's fairly obvious to me that Shimmer is somehow connected to the Void. In the League lore, anything related to the Void is always colored a shade of purple. Adding to this, there are these creepy sounds that we hear emitted from Shimmer several times throughout the show. This also sounds very Void-like. In the League lore, there are also these Void-born creatures that spread the evil influence of the Void. Perhaps Rio is one of these creatures, which could explain the connection between Shimmer and the Void. I'm interested to see if this will play a larger role in future seasons of Arcane. For now, the Hex core seems to be the big existential threat that only really starts to get corrupted and evil because of Shimmer. So maybe the true dangers will come from mixing the alien influence of the Void with the awesome power of Hextech. I guess we'll see. Let's get back to the action.
From your friend, downtown.
Sivika's face is looking a little rough after the time skip, probably from extended use of Shimmer. Echo and his crew are way too badass.
We have 5 minutes till they're out of there.
You ever seen this much Shimmer before?
The girl on the right is clearly here to fool people into thinking Vi is part of the crew, which she probably would be if she wasn't stuck in a concrete cell 40 stories underground.
Oh no, she's here.
I like how Jinx is basically introduced as a horror movie villain, the monster lurking in the darkness, ready to strike at any moment.
Hi.
Yeah, Powder's all grown up, and all messed up. Time has not been kind to her. I could speculate for hours about what it would be like to grow up with all the guilt and trauma she endured, and with Silco to cultivate and fuel her hatred and insecurities. But I think Jinx, as she is now, speaks for herself. Age-wise, she would be about 17 to 19 years old by now, again judging by Amanda's tweet. Remember back in episode 1 when Powder said she couldn't fight and that her bombs never worked? Well, at least she doesn't seem to have that problem anymore. The council archives that I mentioned earlier also had an entry for Jinx. This was a look at her diary and some of her belongings. I won't dive too deeply into this one for the simple reason that it makes me so incredibly sad. Her diary describes the hallucinations she starts having of her family haunting her. It details her slow descent into madness and depression as she eventually realizes that her beloved sister is not coming back. Eventually Vi joins her cast of voices in her head as Powder gives up on ever seeing her sister again, which just breaks my heart. We also see the moment where Powder started killing for Silco in order to earn his approval, which highlights how toxic but also vitally necessary their relationship is. Anyway, I'm just going to pretend that those stories aren't canon, because that stuff is honestly too depressing, even by Arcane standards. Jinx mistakes this girl for Vi, and in this shot we see how she expects Vi to look like now, after not having seen her for years. Powder is still a part of Jinx, but that part of her psyche has basically not progressed past the events of episode 3. Mentally, she's still stuck, which is why she sees her sister at the age she was all those years ago. Jinx is a part of her identity that she has essentially constructed in order to take control of her trauma and to protect herself from all that pain. But Powder still peeks through that protective shell every now and then, which is what happens in this scene. Jinx seemingly seeing Vi again is triggering the part of her that's Powder, and is causing all that pain to come rushing back, all of which is beautifully illustrated by the animation. The cartoonish scribbles we saw hints of all the way back in episode 1 have now taken over completely. Now, as I'm talking about Jinx's character and her struggles, please keep in mind that I am by no means a mental health professional, so I apologize if I missed the mark when talking about some of her mental health issues. I simply find her character fascinating, but I can only speak based on my own observations and limited knowledge. If you want to see an actual professional discuss Jinx's mental health issues, this video and others by Georgia Dow is great and covers it much better than I ever could. I saw a lot of people get fooled into thinking this was actually Vi and that she gets killed just like that. Obviously that would make no sense, but it is a pretty decent fake out even still. The fact that Jinx shot someone who she thought was Vi in the back is pretty disturbing though. Part of me thinks she did realize deep down that this girl wasn't Vi. Even after everything, I really can't see her shooting Vi in the back in cold blood like this. Jinx now pulls out her trusty minigun Pow Pow, which is the same nickname that Vi gave Powder when they were kids, which, again, come on Arcane, why you gotta be like this? Anyway, Jinx is a little unstable, and someone has given her entirely too much ammo to play around with. Scar, who somehow survived getting shot in the face at point blank, saves Echo before he can get himself killed. The dissonant, discordant notes of Ray Chen's violin perfectly support Jinx's unhinged state of mind, as she almost looks scared, seemingly shooting at things that aren't there. Finally, after letting off all her steam, Powder has been subdued and Jinx is back in control for the time being. The shift in her demeanor is quite obvious. The alarm horns blaring in the background sound identical to the ones from episode 1 after the gang robs Jayce's apartment. Clearly this isn't the first time that the Firelights have had a run-in with Jinx. Jinx hiding on the airship seems to be a trap set to lure in and kill as many of them as possible. This line by Silco later on seems to confirm this.
The Firelights were her target, and most are dead.
This explains why Echo is bitter and hateful towards Jinx. She is basically trying to exterminate his people with no care for whatever love and kinship they once had for each other. This is low-key one of the saddest unspoken things in Arcane. As we see a glimpse of in episode 7, Powder and Echo had a good relationship which might have developed into something more. The creators of Arcane have previously talked about a deleted scene in which a younger Echo tries to save Powder from the clutches of Silco and fails. Over time, he has had to let go of Powder, has had to accept that the person he loved is essentially dead. This is also why he's so adamant to Vi in episode 7 that Powder is gone and only Jinx remains. I think he's more so trying to convince himself, because opening that wound again is simply too painful. Meanwhile, above ground, the festivities continue undisturbed. For now. I like how Jayce uses the same mug as those sold in this shop. I'd like to think he bought one of these as a gift for himself. We see one of these airships or blimps? Help me out here, Caitlyn.
Airship, actually. An airship has a rigid metal hull. It's not a blimp.
Thank you. We see one of these zeppelins in Jinx's possession before her attack. It seems she visited the festivities herself to pick up one of these. This little guy is a Poro, a fluffy species native to the Freljord, the snowy northern region of Runeterra that we saw in episode 2.
And what about the council? We stabilized the crystal like they asked. Built the hex gates like they asked.
It appears that Jayce and Victor have more or less been at the mercy of the council in regards to what they were allowed to build with Hextech. The Hexgates were a demand from the council because they realized the enormous amount of wealth it could generate them. Again, the rich get richer and the poor see basically no benefit. No one from the Undercity has any way of utilizing the Hexgates and probably aren't even allowed to. Jayce and Victor want to create tools to help the common man, but have basically been forced to create whatever would make the elite of Piltover more rich because money talks. Helping the poor is a bad short-term investment. Now Jayce and Victor are about to present the next chapter of Hextech as they showcase their tools to Heimerdinger. It's almost comical how naive they are being about this. I mean, you're making oversized, glorified fighting gloves with a built-in shield and a point-and-shoot death ray. What could possibly go wrong? I'm kind of on Heimerdinger's side when he says they need to move a little slow. Maybe a decade is a bit much, but putting this kind of tech in the hands of someone like Silco and Jinx, well, we all know how that would go. On the other hand, Victor has very little time left and wants to see the fruits of his labor before it's too late. He not only wants to make his mark on the world as anyone does, I also think he fears what will happen to Hextech if he's not around. As we've seen, the council has a lot of control over the direction Hextech takes, and without Victor around as a spokesperson for the Undercity, it's likely that Piltover will keep Hextech to themselves and the Undercity will once again see no benefit. Victor himself also looks visibly deteriorated. His cheeks are more sunken, he has bigger bags under his eyes, and he's clearly heavily reliant on his cane at this point. The consequences of growing up in Piltover's filth has clearly taken its toll on him. These look like dead people, possibly the Firelights Jinx killed. Pretty rough that Echo can't even get the bodies of his fallen crew members back. This is the mask that Jinx knocked off the pink-haired girl. Jinx apparently took the time to scribble on her individual cartridges. That's some serious commitment to the brand. Caitlyn is channeling her inner Sherlock Holmes, playing out the events in her mind with impressive accuracy. When Caitlyn later shows this image to Vi in her cell, she has filled in the monkey face from memory since she sees it later in its entirety during Jinx's attack.
You're from the Undercity.
What gave it away? This scene highlights yet another key strength that Fortiche has, which is their excellent use of framing. For every shot, the placement of the camera expertly directs the audience's attention to where it's needed while making use of interesting and fresh perspectives from which to observe the action. Even in quiet scenes like this one, the framing keeps things interesting and keeps the audience engaged. This is one of the many things in filmmaking where you only really notice it if it's bad, but that doesn't mean good framing doesn't deserve recognition.
Caitlyn Kiraman. Why does that not surprise me? Interfering in an investigation again.
In Caitlyn's council archives, there is a document that shows that she's been reprimanded by Marcus for sticking her nose in things he clearly doesn't want her to. So this is not the first time Marcus has caught her doing rogue detective work. Marcus probably can't outright fire her because of the power her parents hold, but he can keep her off the trail by assigning her dead-end jobs and obscuring evidence as much as possible, as he's doing right now.
If I could just question him,
I'll take it from here. Since you're looking for more work, you can take the graveyard shift tonight at the fair.
Caitlyn probably knows she has some level of immunity from consequences, which she exploits as much as possible in order to do actual police work. A lot has changed in the Undercity in 7 years. A short and sweet animated music video mirroring that of episode 1 shows us exactly how much has happened, while the fourth original contemporary song on Arcane's soundtrack, Dirty Little Animals by Bones UK, plays. There is a lot of cool world building for the quote-unquote new Undercity in these quick shots. We've still got the Art Nouveau decor going on, but technology and aesthetics have clearly moved ahead a couple decades. Mixed in with the old style seen in Act 1 is a heavy use of neon lights and a much more grungy look to everything and everyone. These shots nicely establish how Silco's influence has seeped into every aspect of the Undercity. There is still the old Art Nouveau artwork and architecture, but plastered on top of this is Silco's clear influence. The Undercity is turning into an enterprise, and in the process, a new busy urban culture has sprung to life. Basically, capitalism has arrived to the Undercity. The rich have gotten richer and the poor have gotten poorer. What else is new? I'd like to think that these pretty Art Nouveau inspired artworks, similar to this one in episode 5, are referencing some sort of deity. In the League lore, the playable character Qiyana is a deity in Zorn. She's the goddess of wind and helps the Zornite people by sending gusts of fresh air down into the lower levels of the city where the toxic fumes would otherwise kill people. Having a goddess that is actually a living, breathing person and who can control the weather obviously doesn't fit with the tone that Arcane is going for, so it makes sense that Qiyana isn't in the show. But the idea that the citizens of the Undercity would be praying to some kind of deity for fresh air or for any kind of help at all would make a lot of sense. Speaking of religion, this scene and especially this glorified Burning Man installation feels very religious. The people seem to be offering this techno turtle these balls, which may be eyes. More of these can be seen in these canisters and globes attached to the creature's body. The symbol on its hands is probably the symbol of whatever religion this is. This is presumably the same eye as the one we see on the sign that stands on top of Powder and Vi's childhood home in episode 6.
What the hell is that?
The sign.
I assume this is also the same symbol that Silco has put on top of the sign for the last drop. This may be completely wrong, but my theory is that this is a religion that Silco has started in order to brainwash people into being loyal to him. Throw in a little Shimmer addiction and suddenly the people are a lot more manageable. All very handy when you've just usurped the throne from the generally well-liked Peacekeeper. In episode 6, when Silco hands out Shimmer to the poor downtrodden people of the Sumps, he definitely projects some Messiah or Jesus imagery. The eye on top of Vi and Powder's old home is a sign of his power over the people of Zorn. Vi knocking it down in episode 6 is therefore quite significant metaphorically.
I'm gonna bring your bullshit empire down all around you.
It's crazy to see the stark difference between how Vander ran the Undercity and how Silco runs it now. Everything has been turned into an enterprise. The dangerous allure of the Undercity has been turned into a business at the expense of those less fortunate. This Monopoly-looking guy is sipping on some classic cherry blossom pure air, while having his shoes shined by a kid. There is also a poster for a show at the Herald's Palace, which is a clear League of Legends reference. This absolute unit of a guy is getting a tattoo of the in-universe band Pentakill, which is a nice little Easter egg. He makes some pretty great metal music, check him out if you haven't. This shot just oozes style and attitude, like calm the hell down. Where do we even begin? This dude has what appears to be a vulture on his shoulder and a freaking muscled up crocodile by a leash. I'd like to imagine his fur coat, which has a gold collar of course, is made of poro fur, since this pink colored poro over here, one of the two owned by this lady, seems to be in serious attack mode towards this dude. What a fantastic shot to establish the people of the new Undercity. Here is good old Sevika wandering the streets as 19th century automobiles drive past her. This dude is carrying some toxic looking fluids, which I think is a nod to Singed from League of Legends, the guy that the Doctor dude is based on in Arcane. Well, this looks a little different. The last drop has gone from bar to nightclub. I'm pretty sure these three patrons are the same as these three in episode 1. The character design of this lady makes me think she's based on someone in real life, maybe someone from Fortiche, but I have no source on that. She can also be seen in episode 2 in this shot. And I literally just noticed this now while editing, but look who was also in that scene. It's Pascal on the left and Arnaud sleeping at the table. The co-founders of Fortiche certainly get around. These two gentlemen are the same dudes that Sevika plays cards with in episode 5, before Vi rudely interrupts their game. I love it when characters are reused this way. Not only is it more immersive that characters appear in different realistic contexts, it's also fun to notice as a viewer. On top of that, it's more efficient for Fortiche since they can reuse assets, saving time and money. All of Silco's crew is here partying. Well, except for this guy of course. This guy with the robot hand, casually arm wrestling over shards of glass, is one of them. The crazy licky guy is here as well, and Chuck is behind the bar of course.
She fired on us.
There are always mishaps in battle. It was your job to make sure things went smoothly. You failed.
Silco's eye has gotten noticeably worse since last episode. His pupil is even more fractured and less round. Clearly the shimmer he injects has its side effects and is not a permanent solution. The cracks in his skin around his eye also seem more pronounced, and as we see at the end of episode 5, he's using makeup to cover it up. This is another neat bit of characterization that wasn't necessary but adds a lot. This tells us that Silco is vain, he wants others to respect him, and he's self-conscious about his looks and his scars. I love the detail that Silco's cup along with his owl figure is clearly decorated by Jinx. The cup even has her signature monkey face on it.
One of those Firelight wackos was a girl with pink hair.
Your sister's gone. You know that as well as I do.
Okay, so I guess now is as good a time as any to get started on discussing Jinx and Silco's very interesting relationship. First of all, bravo Arcane. The relationship between these two is so nuanced and well written that several therapists have weighed in on it with really interesting analysis. Half the fans are in the camp that believes Silco loves Jinx and has done nothing wrong, while the other half thinks Silco is a manipulative, abusive monster. Even without going any further, I think that's impressive in its own right, especially after episode 1 to 3, where Silco was basically just a one-dimensional villain with cool monologues and a freaky eye. But let's dive right into it, shall we? I think almost everyone watching this scene for the first time was a little uneasy at how close these two are in the physical sense.
I know.
Jinx sitting on Silco's lap is a little disturbing considering how old she is now, and it makes you wonder whether their relationship is strictly platonic. As the creators of Arcane have said, this is very much deliberate and it makes a lot of sense. Jinx displays clear signs of attachment disorder, which often occurs in children when their primary caretaker disappears for whatever reason too soon in their development. Because of this, it's also a common trait in orphans, which again fits with Jinx. Her parents died when she was very young. Vi did her best to become her caretaker along with Vander, but then they both either died or disappeared when Powder was still very young. Attachment disorder often results in children being overly physical and not respecting the personal boundaries of their caretakers. It's always Jinx initiating physical contact with Silco, which makes a lot of sense from this perspective. Beyond this, another very unhealthy aspect to their relationship is the fact that Silco projects so many of his issues onto her and is very codependent on her. He trusts her with his eye injection thing, he projects all his trauma and psychological issues onto her, and he has her carry out his dirty work, including killing people. All these things make sense to trust someone with if you consider them your peer, but it's simply way too much responsibility to put on a child. Also, as a random aside, whenever I see people calling Silco a great dad, I die a little inside. Silco is an awful dad. I don't think he means to be, I think he tries his best, but he only ends up hurting Jinx more, since he's too broken himself to properly care for her. On top of that, Jinx still has serious self-worth issues, as she did when she was Powder, and will go to extreme lengths to prove herself to Silco, which he encourages. He also doesn't seem very keen on getting her professional help for her psychosis or other various mental health issues. These things and many more make their relationship very toxic and emotionally abusive, but as always that would be too black and white for Arcane. The reason why the relationship is so damn interesting is that it's a lot more nuanced than that. Silco genuinely loves Jinx and Jinx probably loves him back, but their way of expressing that love is deeply flawed and often more harmful than good. This is something I'll return to several times as we get deeper into their relationship through the next episodes. Mel is hosting a Progress Day party for the rich elite of Piltover. Look at good old Councillor Haskell over here, charming all the women, that dirty old rascal. I like the deliberate contrast in showing an Undercity party earlier, immediately followed by a Piltover party. A bit of a different tempo. All the councillors seem to be here, with the exception of Heimerdinger and Cassandra. When the Golden Boy walks in, there seems to be an even mix of contempt and interest. Some probably see him as a threat, while others, one person in particular, sees him as someone to make money off of.
Piltover needs a leader who looks forward. Give the people a glimpse of the future.
Jayce, my boy, I think she might be attempting to manipulate you. Meanwhile, in Jinx's Batcave. Some of these memorabilia are things we've seen before. This stuffed teddy bear is the same as this one from episode 1. This is one of the metal chompers that Jinx uses with her grenades, perhaps the same one as the one we see from the very same shot as before, or it could be the one she pulled out of the pipe in this scene in episode 1. The suitcase is where she had all her stuff, including her drawings, as we saw in episode 3. This rhino is yet again a reference to the Get Jinxed music video. As I pointed out in episode 2, a similar rhino, though much smaller, is also seen in this shot in the basement of the last drop.
I know know, just some wannabe street trash. I got confused, that's all.
We already got a glimpse of how unstable Jinx has become from the fight earlier in the episode. Now we see the true scale of how bad it is. Jinx clearly suffers from some serious psychosis. She sees and hears her dead family members in the form of scribbled hallucinations whispering in her ear. Milio seems to be the most prominent, which makes sense since he was the hardest on her when he was alive. We never see Vi in these hallucinations, but according to the Council archives and Jinx herself in episode 9, Vi is a voice in her head too, though seemingly a more positive one.
Picking me up.
When all the colors were black, you're the reason I'm still alive.
I know, just some wannabe street trash.
The jump cuts of Jinx seemingly warping from one place to another shows us her disconnect with reality and how her sense of time and place is all messed up.
I'm not weak.
Again we see her deep-rooted need to prove herself to the person she cares about the most. We saw it with Vi and now we see it with Silco. Jinx has serious attachment issues and is deeply afraid of being left behind if she isn't of direct practical use to whoever her caretaker is. She doesn't seem to understand or trust in the love that Silco or indeed Vi earlier has for her and doesn't grasp the idea of unconditional love. We obviously can't talk about Jinx without talking about how utterly brilliant the performance of Ella Purnell is.
Hi.
It's exceedingly rare to see a performance that displays as much range as she does when voicing Jinx.
The boy savior.
This is something the creators of Arcane talked about in Bridging the Rift, finding a voice actress that can express vulnerability, insecurity, hurt, sadness, anger, playfulness, over-the-top mania, as well as balancing being sympathetic and traumatized with being terrifying and murderous. Well, it's a pretty big ask for anyone to have that kind of range. Luckily, they found someone who could do all that, and damn does Ella Purnell knock it out the park.
It was like the pearly gates just opened.
Guess it's time.
Not so subtle symbolism here with Jayce's mug on his mug blocking out Victor. Victor doesn't mind Jayce taking the spotlight, but as we know, this quickly spirals out of control as Mel weaves her web of political influence and draws Jayce further and further away from the dream of making actual meaningful change with Hextech. Jayce exhibits some serious Steve Jobs energy in this scene.
But we're not done yet.
But there is one more thing that I want to talk about.
He also exhibits some Donald Trump small loan of $1 billion vibes with this quote.
My family and I are simple people. In our factory, we made hammers.
You're not simple people if your family owns several factories. You're pretty high up in the food chain at that point. Check your privilege, my guy. Jayce has been put in a serious pickle between choosing to appease Heimerdinger, thereby playing it safe and moving along slowly, or appeasing Victor and Mel, thereby choosing the risky path, but ensuring Victor gets a chance to see Hextech come to fruition and opening a door for more power with Mel by his side. I think he chooses wisely for the most part. I'm sad for Victor, but again, putting these kinds of weapons in everyone's hands with no safeguards is a terrible idea. It seems the iPhone will have to wait a bit before being launched.
That it then? I thought that Talus boy was some kind of genius. Last year didn't he launch a blimp halfway across the continent?
Airship, actually. An airship has a rigid metal hull. It's not a blimp.
Caitlyn definitely seems a little socially awkward, which makes sense since she grew up in a very sheltered environment and probably has a tough time knowing how to behave with so-called normal people. She's clearly trying though, given the fact that she's talking to these people at all.
Don't you have a cocktail party to attend?
Good one, guys, you really got her on that one. You get the sense that Caitlyn is used to these kinds of jabs and has long since learned to just smile and hide the pain.
Fire! Fire!
Caitlyn takes charge and gets her hands on a fire extinguisher. She tries to put out the fire on the outside of the building, which is ultimately why she survives while the rest of the enforcers don't. They head inside where Jinx has set up what is honestly a horrific trap, abusing the fact that these people show empathy and want to save a little girl in order to lure them in and kill them is really quite evil. But these people just bullied Caitlyn and they are Piltover enforcers, so killing them is not a big deal, I guess. I get that enforcers have killed numerous Saw Knights over the years, the people on the bridge at the beginning being a key example, but at the same time I don't agree with Jinx's eye for an eye approach of murdering them indiscriminately, especially since this group of enforcers aren't the ones patrolling the streets of the Undercity. Caitlyn sees the monkey face for the first time and can therefore connect the dots between this attack and the earlier attack on the airship. That's why she knows it's a trap a second before the bombs go off. This model replica of an airship is the same one Jinx was holding in this earlier scene.
The gemstone is gone, along with some of our research papers.
Some pretty cool foreshadowing with Jinx's painted explosion splattered on top of the stained glass window in the background of Jayce and Victor's lab. We also see her monkey face to the right again, which clearly links Jinx's attacks. Caitlyn doesn't have to work very hard to figure that one out.
How did it come to this?
Well, you want the short or the long version, my guy? As wise and experienced as you are, it's kind of wild that you didn't see any of this developing. But I guess that's the whole point. He is too blinded by his position of power and perceived wisdom to see the problems happening right below his small nose.
The Undercity cannot be controlled. Not by us.
Cassandra's response here sort of hints at support for an independent Zorn, or at least something to that effect, which is interesting.
Mr. Talus, could the trenchers build a weapon with the stolen crystal?
Shimmer. The way the councillors so casually use the term trenchers, which is clearly a derogatory term when discussing the inhabitants of the Undercity, is a little off-putting. But I guess it's par for the course at this point.
I have come before you to recommend that we suspend all Hextech operations until the situation is resolved.
Have you lost your mind?
The hex gates must remain open.
Shouldn't the safety of Piltover be our first priority?
Sure, Jay, safety of the people is important and all that, but won't somebody please think of the money? Also, as everyone has probably noticed, Haskell still hasn't solved his child's toy that Mel gave him in episode 2, almost 7 years ago at this point. It's a little on the nose, the fact that he still has it with him after so long, but it nicely conveys the message that he's still under Mel's thumb. Also the fact that he's not particularly intelligent.
Mr. Talus has demonstrated his commitment to our safety. And it seems to me, only Mr. Talus has the knowledge necessary to secure the hex gates.
Marcus is clearly a little nervous. A new counselor means a new player in the game. Jayce is an unknown factor that Marcus may not be able to control. As most people know by now, the song blasting from the gramophone player is none other than Jinx's theme from League, Get Jinxed, sung by Gareth. That brings us to our fourth reference to the Get Jinxed music video, which is great. This song is obviously a banger, and the fact that Jinx is listening to her own theme song while working away at the Hextech is totally in character and super great. It does beg the question though, whether Jinx's theme song is canon in the Arcane universe? Does this song actually exist and it just happens to line up really well with who Jinx is as a person? Or did Jinx record this song herself as a fun side project between murdering people for Silco? Or perhaps Jinx is simply imagining the song and we are hearing the lyrics she hears in her head.
That's me!
That would probably make the most sense, but again, I'm heavily overanalyzing this. Jinx is working on converting these mechanical butterflies seen at the Progress Day exhibitions into these kamikaze butterflies we see in episode 7. There's a drawing of Vander, Vi, Milio, Clagger and Powder hanging on the wall right here. We see the same drawing earlier in this scene.
Half a dozen enforcers dead! Enforcers dead!
Yeah.
A building blown to pieces!
Oh, yeah.
Jinx exhibits some serious disobedient teenager energy right here. Granted, most disobedient teenagers don't randomly murder 6 police officers in a planned terrorist attack when they get moody, but whatever.
Actually, I do.
To me, this scene succinctly showcases the unhealthy need for approval that Jinx has and how bad Silco is at setting boundaries for Jinx.
Happy Progress Day!
The fact that Jinx thinks that murdering 6 people and possibly starting a dangerous war with Piltover in order to earn Silco's approval is a good thing is worrying. The fact that Silco stops berating her the moment he sees the gemstone only enforces this behavior, which is really super bad. Contrast that with how Vander handles a very similar situation in episode 1, and it's clear that Silco's parenting leaves a lot to be desired. Vander's way of handling things certainly wasn't perfect either, and arguably put way too much weight on Vi's shoulders. But at least he tried to be a parent and to rein in Vi's violent tendencies, as opposed to Silco, who only further reinforces them in Jinx.
I've had a break in the case.
Shouldn't you be resting?
While the trail is hot. Listen.
Another nice bit of characterization for Caitlyn right here, as she blatantly disregards Jayce's get well soon flowers along with all the other ones she's received. None of these cards are open, so she hasn't even looked at them. She clearly doesn't like people feeling sorry for her and has no time for rest when a crime needs solving. She has probably spent a lifetime having people fawn over her and show her false empathy in order to get on the good side of the Kiramen eras and know exactly how fake all the well-wishers are. Caitlyn cuts straight to the chase and starts outlining her theory of the grand conspiracy to Jayce. You get the sense that this is where she thrives, when she can use her analytical skills to help protect Piltover from crime and corruption. This is our first look at Caitlyn's bedroom, which again nicely encapsulates the duality of her character. On one hand, it's incredibly extravagant and opulent, just like every other part of the Kiramen house. On the other, it's sparsely decorated, almost utilitarian, serving mostly just as a space to have her conspiracy board. Another small thing that the framing in this scene clearly draws attention to is Caitlyn's physique and her rather graceful movement. Again, something Arcane does really well. Characters not only act in ways that fit them, but also look the part and move in ways that support who they are. Mel is graceful and seductive owing to her experience in navigating the politics of Piltover. Silco is very calculated in how he carries himself, which again supports his character. Vi is very in your face and carries herself with confidence, which also mirrors her personality and her approach to things. As for Caitlyn, she is graceful and calculated in how she moves. She has probably been taught how to move like a so-called lady her whole life. Somewhat in contrast to that, she has a strong physique because of her work as an enforcer and her marksmanship training. While she may know how to carry herself to fit in with higher society, that doesn't necessarily translate to the real world, as we'll see in the next episode.
I was actually hoping you might consider joining my staff.
House Talus Security? That's a ceremonial position. I'd live behind a desk.
Caitlyn despises being patronized or thought of as someone helpless and fragile. That's basically how Jayce sees her, as a little sister for him to keep safe and out of harm's way. I guess you can't really fault him for that, but Kate clearly wants none of it. She wants to be in the middle of the action and to do things her way. Which leads us to the final part of the episode, as Caitlyn goes on a little unsanctioned trip to an island off the coast of Piltover. The architecture of Stillwater feels more like something you would see in Noxus, not Piltover. It has a very brutalist feel with a huge intimidating facade of stone. The doors opening to this red ominous hue adds to the uninviting atmosphere and makes it seem like Caitlyn is entering a door to hell, which I guess is not far off. The warden sitting at his desk acts as a gatekeeper of hell, sending the souls of the damned deep into the bowels of the prison to be punished for their sins.
This one was hit by friendly fire. He's got reason to talk. Must have been sent in today?
Inmate 2135.
This guy's called Locke, which is kind of ironic since he's now locked up.
Well, there's been an incident.
This poor guy can't catch a break from either of the sisters. He just got shot by Jinx and now gets his jaw broken by Vi, presumably for the second time. Shouldn't have cast your lot in with Silco, I suppose. Vi is kept in the lowest and likely most secure part of the prison. She has been busy making a reputation for herself in Stillwater these past years. As Caitlyn descends, she looks calm and composed, but the nervous tick of her fingers tapping her clipboard betrays how out of place she feels. Before we end off this episode, let's touch up on what poor Vi has most likely been up to all these years. Like her sister, it hasn't been a great time. Let's take a look at the council archives first, as there is also an entry for Vi and her time in prison. Vi's entry is a series of records from Stillwater Hold, all documenting her predictably bad behavior. We first see a record of an escape attempt by Vi, wherein she strangles an enforcer. It's noted that she keeps talking about a so-called powdered substance, which the guards interpret as drugs, but is obviously powder. A description of Vi is given here, where she's stated to be 17 years old, which roughly matches what we know. A part of the record is striked out, wherein Vi is described as matching one of the suspects in the apartment bombing from episode 1. Presumably Marcus has ordered this removed, probably because he doesn't want to draw more attention to Vi, since Silco is not supposed to know that she's still alive. The next entry is when Vi is around 20 years old. This describes her attacking 2 other inmates who both work for Silco. She tries to get information from them about Powder, but they don't know anything, because Powder probably goes by Jinx at this point. Vi beats them up, and we're told that this is at least the 7th time that she has attacked other inmates like this. Vi apparently goes by the nickname Pink by both guards and other inmates. At this point she has also gotten most of her tattoos, and it is mentioned that they are all self-inked. Most of them probably are, but her doing the ones on her back seem a little far-fetched. The final entry describes another attack on an inmate by Vi. In this she throws another of Silco's thugs off a roof, breaking several of his bones. It's noted that Vi has become even more aggressive and sullen, impossible for the guards to control. At this point she has stopped talking about Powder, having given up on gaining any intel on her sister and instead using all her anger to exact revenge on any of Silco's crew that end up in Stillwater. She's also said to have a collection of all the weapons that Silco's goons have tried to attack her with in her cell, which is super badass. This record is seemingly dated as not too far from when Caitlyn comes and frees her, as Vi is described as in her early 20s. I think it is somewhat unappreciated by most people just how miserable Vi must have been all this time, by herself in a prison cell with no sunlight and no friendly company. Vi was taken here moments after witnessing most of her family die in episode 3. On top of that, she saw Silco standing with a knife over her sister, who for all intents and purposes believes Vi has abandoned her. She was then forced to deal with all that trauma, guilt and grief all alone in a prison cell, with only her thoughts tormenting her as company, and with no idea whether her sister was still alive. Furthermore, she also has no record, no trial, no sentence, which means she can presumably look forward to being stuck here until she rots away. That alone would be enough to make most people crack. Adding the regular physical abuse from the guards on top of that, something that seemingly happened almost daily, as well as frequent stints in solitary, and it's a wonder Vi still has any fighting spirit or empathy left in her. I think Arcane does a good job of subtly hinting at how awful this must have been for Vi, but I am slightly disappointed by the fact that it doesn't really seem to have a huge effect on Vi's psyche in the following episodes. They did such a good job with Jinx in showing how trauma and guilt haunts her, and honestly Vi would realistically be going through a lot of the same. We do get some hints at Vi's trauma and guilt in episode 8 and 9, first in her scene with Caitlyn and then her talk to Jayce about the lasting damage throwing someone in prison does to them. And finally in episode 9 as she opens up a bit more about how awful it all was to Jinx.
I spent so many nights in that shitty prison on that freezing floor, hungry, bloody, counting the hours.
But apart from that, she acts kind of fine. I do think that is part of her personality, bottling up her emotions deep within herself and taking rash action, letting out her emotions as anger instead of working through her issues. I would just have liked to see her show a little more vulnerability in terms of how episode 3 and the years in prison must have negatively affected her. Maybe, hopefully, we'll get something like that in season 2, in a scene where Vi finally breaks down, maybe with Caitlyn by her side and lets all her hurt out. That would make an incredibly powerful and emotional scene and would really deepen Vi's character as well as her relationship with Caitlyn. But maybe that'd be too sweet for Arcane. Can't have nice things, can we? A final cool detail at the end of the episode is Vi's assigned number in prison, which is 516. Very clever, Arcane. And with that, let's end off the episode watching Vi put her hard-earned muscles to good use and punch the heck out of some concrete walls.
Who the hell are you?
And that's all she wrote for episode 4. Kind of a quieter episode in terms of story beats and plot points, which is necessary to reintroduce all our characters after the time skip and to set up all the pieces on the board in preparation for the final half of the season and beyond. We get a lot more Caitlyn stuff in this episode, which is nice and definitely necessary since we got very little of her in Act 1. We got to see how absolutely awful the sisters are doing and how relatively well Jayce and Victor are doing in contrast, if we ignore the whole deadly illness thing. We got to see how much Piltover has changed with the emergence of Hextech and how different the Undercity is now with Silco in charge. And that's all for me for this episode. Thank you so much for sticking with me to the bitter end. Hopefully I can get the next video out a little faster, maybe even before season 2 drops. Wouldn't that be crazy?